Hi, this is Josh with Remax Professionals, and I just want to say thanks for attending my webinar today. The whole purpose of the webinar is just to kind of go over what we saw in 2025 and kind of give like a year-end review of the certain data points and what's happened in our market. So I'm just going to get started with it real quick and we'll get going. If you don't know me, I like to call myself the real estate geek. I've been a high producing agent since 2018. I'm an Excel nerd. I love crunching the numbers. I'm married. I have four kids. So really, I'm always busy if I'm not doing real estate. I'm doing fun things like camping with the family, going snowboarding. We like to go to the lake. We do a lot of fun stuff. And yeah, if I'm not doing any of that and I'm just taking some downtime, I'm usually watching some British comedies, which, if you've seen them, makes you laugh. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started into the market and start getting into the numbers. So here's my review of 2025 for Reno and Sparks. To understand our market, the first thing is we want to look at three main factors. We want to look at affordability, we want to look at volume, and we want to look at pricing. Those are the three main things that we check out when we're trying to understand the overall market. We're going to start with affordability. And when I talk about affordability, I'm really talking about interest rates. When we look at interest rates over the last year, they actually started to come down. We started around almost 7% at 6.9. By the end of the year, according to Freddie Mac, conventional loans were averaging around 6.15%. That was what was being offered. We want to look at the historic interest rates. When we started in 2022, we were looking closer to that like 3.4 range. We went all the way up to about that 7% range and then went all the way up to 8% by the middle or towards the end of 2023. And then it just started to kind of gradually, slowly come down, giving buyers a little bit more relief when looking at mortgages. That's the first part of the pie, the affordability piece. Now let's talk about volume. When we look at volume, what we're talking about is month supply of inventory. This is where we take the total available listings at the end of the month and we divide it by the total amount of sales during that month. And that gives us how many months supply of inventory we have. So if there's 500 listings at the end of the month available for purchase, but during that month, 250 listings were sold, then we would say there's 2 months supply of inventory. And we use that number to kind of come up with an idea of how strong the market is for buyers or for sellers. And this is what we go by. When we look at the Reno Sparks market, we're around 2.5 months supply of inventory. We like to say anything less than 4 months is a seller's market. That's where homes will appreciate year over year. If we get over 4 months, closer to 5 to 6 months, that becomes a neutral market, and homes will still appreciate. It just they will not appreciate as fast, and they'll likely appreciate at the rate of inflation. Once we get over to that 6 months of inventory, that's where we start to see a buyer's market, and that's where homes start to actually depreciate year over year. We did see a little bit of that right after they raised interest rates. About 6 months after, homes started to depreciate because we started to get a lot more inventory on the market. So when we look at the active inventory for 2025, what I'm showing is that we had about 996 listings in January of 2025. That went all the way up to about 1,615 listings and then all the way back down to about 990. So we had this raise and then drop off, and this goes with the seasonality of our market of listings start to accumulate through the spring and through the summer, and we also get a lot of sales during that time. And then after that, people either take their properties off the market or they will they'll either take them off the market, or if they are there, they may lower the price and get them sold. We start to see that active inventory start to go down. If we look at active inventory over the last, 5 years or so, we see that cycle all the way through with every year. It's just been different amounts. And here we are. We had really low amount of inventory in 2020, 2021. Once interest rates went up, that inventory shot right up, and then it kind of stayed in that area of where we're having higher amounts of active inventory available throughout the last couple of years. However, this is where sold listings are. Over the last year, we're seeing about 300 in the beginning of the year for those months, go all the way up to about 430 or so per month, around 400 a month. And then towards the end of the year, it was around 384 listings sold during December. Here's a historical look at sales, and as we can see is we have that same cycle where they go up during the summer months and come down during the winter months. But what we will also see here is when the interest rates went up sharply, we had a sharp decrease in sales. And when they started to gradually go down, we started to see some gradual increase in sales. So now we're going to go over like what the last, year was for month supply of inventory. We saw, as I was saying, around 2.5 was the average, started around 2.4, went up to 3.2 months, and ended around 1.9 months. Again, this is where we've been at though. When we look, if we go all the way back to 2020, when things were really a hot seller's market, we were in the low twos and we got all the way down to under 1 month of inventory by 2021. But once those interest rates shot up, that is where we started getting back into like the 3 month supply of inventory. And then it started coming back down, and we've just kind of been floating in this 2.5 month bit for a while now. When we look at the sales volume, though, this is how affordability has actually affected the overall market. What we're seeing is that in 2020, we saw that there was 7,155 homes that sold. 2021, around 7,000 homes, and then it went down about 18% to 5,700 homes that sold in 22, and then maybe another 15% from there at 4,800 homes that sold, maybe went up just a little bit, maybe not quite 1% the next year in 24 to 4,875. And then by 2025, we were at 5,000 units that sold, which is about a 3% increase from the year before. But we are a long way off from where we were in 2020, 2021, where we were selling about 7,000 units. That is a direct result of affordability challenges in our market. So let's talk about the pricing. In Reno, the median price for single family home was 680,000. This throughout the year, we started around 600,000 and kind of went up and down throughout the year. Stayed above that six mark, and then by the end of the year, we were at 680. When we look at it historically, if we go all the way back to 22, we were right around 600,000, went up to about 645, kind of had some dips when the rates went down, like I was talking about earlier, but then it did. It went back up, and this is what we're seeing is we're just kind of staying in that kind of above six, uh, between six and maybe 625 up to 650 over the last year or so. In Sparks, it's around 522,000. We don't see as many peaks and valleys in Sparks, and that's just basically the market is a little bit different. There's a lot more diverse areas in Reno where we see higher and lower prices on homes in a lot of different pockets of Reno. Again, when you look historically back to 22, you see about the same. So I would say from 22 to now, even with this, when you take this little valley out, you're seeing a very balanced market. So is it a buyer or a seller's market? That's always the question I get. And this is what I like to say. It really depends. And what I mean by that is this: we're always looking at the month supply of inventory to determine if buyers have the upper hand or sellers. Now, I could just say, oh, yeah, we're at 2.5 months of inventory for the whole region, and that means it's a seller's market. That is true to a point. However, we have to dive deeper. And so I like to break the market out by different segments. And we're just going to look at single family homes right now at the moment and kind of look at that. So anything under 500,000, yeah, we're definitely in a seller's market because here we are, the highest amount that we had on month supply of inventory is about 2 months. So about 4 weeks of inventory um, and available, and that buyer demand is strong under the 500,000. When we look at 500 to 750, that shoots up from about 2 months to closer to 2.5 months of inventory. We had a little couple spikes and valleys throughout the year, but on average, you're probably looking about 2.5 months of inventory. Gives the buyers a little bit more options, but it really does have a lot more leverage for sellers still at that point. However, once we get to about between 750,000 and a million, now we start shooting up into the 3 to 4 months of inventory, 3.5, 4 months of inventory. I would say on average, that's where we're looking at. That adds a lot more softening in that market, and that gives buyers a little bit more leverage where they're going to be able to negotiate with those sellers because they will have different options of different homes to purchase in that area. And then when we look at the $1 to $1.5 million market, now we're starting to be much higher in the fours and fives, some threes, but I would say on average around four. So here we are again, where they're softening in that market, where the sellers are not going to be able to demand as high of a price or as strong of a price on their property because buyers will have other options out there. However, once we get into the 1.5 million and up, now we're really looking at a lot of inventory. And we started out with almost 8 months of inventory in January last year. And then it kind of fell down, and now it just kind of floated between 5 and 6.5 months of inventory, maybe up to 7 months of inventory over the last year. So that is a much softer market where there is a lot more leverage for buyers in that market because they will have multiple options when they're in that price range. Now, I know we just talked about single family residences. Another segment of the market that we're seeing softening would be condos. And I want to show you this. Condos are we're seeing that month supply of inventory being anywhere from four. It does get down into the threes, but it's been like between 4 and 5 months of inventory. On average, you're probably hitting around four, and that's for all the condos in Reno and Sparks, which means your condos, whether it's 1 bedroom up to a 3 bedroom condo, depending on where it is, overall condos are just a soft part of our market. And one of the reasons we're seeing that is insurance rates have gone up significantly on condos, which has caused the HOA fees to go up. And along with that, we have seen deferred maintenance on certain complexes, which also increases the expenses, which increases the HOA fees. With high HOA fees and high interest rates, that puts a lot of condos in a position where a buyer may say, I thought I was buying a condo because it was my step into the market, but once I add the 400 HOA fee and the high interest rate mortgage, well, now I can actually go buy a home, or it wouldn't take much more to buy a cheaper home. So I think I'm going to do that. And we have seen a lot of condos sitting on the market for a long time. So I would definitely say that condos are a soft spot in our market. So what should we expect over this next year? Overall, I would say if the trends continue the way they are with low inventory, buyer demand, and a little bit more of relief on interest rates, we will probably still see strong pricing in some of those lower price segments. The higher price segments, we are still probably going to see softening in those areas, and we're probably going to see more leverage on the buyer side. Same with condos, we'll probably see more leverage on the buyer side than on the seller side. That is, not taken into consideration where interest rates will actually go because we don't know where that will take us. They could go up, they could go down. That's kind of a wild card at this moment. But overall, if the trends remain the same, this is what I would expect is to see a lot more leverage for sellers in the lower price bands and a little bit more leverage for buyers in the higher price bands. Is there any questions on anything? Right. Well, I appreciate you coming today. If you want to connect with me, feel free to reach out. Here's my contact information. I love going over these numbers. I love dissecting the information in the market and understanding what's going on. Or if you have any questions about real estate in general, I'm happy to help. I appreciate you coming today and thanks.